This is a screencast of the 1999 Rhetorical Analysis prompt from College Board. So let's go ahead and take a look at the prompt. Read the following two passages about Florida's Okefenokee swamp carefully, then write an essay in which you analyze how the distinctive style of each passage reveals the purpose of its writer. So how style reveals purpose in two different passages. So there's two different ways that come to mind immediately for how to organize this essay. First strategy, one paragraph each passage. Second strategy, if there are comparisons and contrasts in the ways that their styles reveal purpose, perhaps comparison contrast kind of way. But let's go ahead and take a look at the passages before we come to any decisions about organization. So passage 1, Okefenokee Swamp, Produce Swamp and Wildlife Refuge in southeastern Georgia and northern Florida. So they start by defining what it is, giving context. Is a shallow saucer-shaped depression approximately, so they have some imagery. Then they have a listing of specific details, facts. The swamp is bounded on the east by the low sandy trail ridge. So again, we're kind of going back to this imagery here, which prevents direct drainage into the Atlantic. The swamp is partially drained southward into the Atlantic by the Swanee and St. Mary's rivers. So again, it's remaining very factually based. Directions, drainage, specific places and names. It includes low sandy ridges, wet grassy savannas, small islands called hummocks. Again, that definition. So this is very kind of educational, informative so far. It seems to be instructional. Surrounded by marshes and extensive prairies, and they put that in quotations not to indicate sarcasm, because this isn't that kind of piece. This isn't an emotional piece. This is a very factual piece. So it's probably about to define an unfamiliar term. Prairies, or dark water areas covered by undergrowth and trees. Well, yes, that is a different definition of prairie than the one that we're used to. So this is in like a water context rather than like a grasslands context. So it would be important for them to define how they are using the term in this particular case. Vegetation is dense in the swamp and includes giant tupelo, bald cypress trees, festooned, ooh, nice word, nice diction there, with Spanish moss, brush, and vines. Again, a lot of details. Sandy soil is above the water, pine trees predominate, meandering channels of open water form an intricate maze, exotic flowers, among them floating hearts, lilies, and rare orchids, abound. The swamp is populated with diverse and abundant wildlife, with about 175 species of birds and at least 40 species of mammals, which include raccoons, black bear, whitetail, deer, bobcats, fox, and otter. Alligators are also present. Okay, so right off the bat, there's a couple of things that stand out to me in this first passage. It is very educational. It seems to be intended to inform. This becomes clear through its use of specific details, through its use of definition, through its use of description, and I would say through its use of listing. Those are the things that kind of stood out to me as particular strategies that it uses informatively. It does have kind of a little bit of imagery, but mainly it seems intended to inform, very factual, lots of listing of different types of plant species, animal species, and definition of what things mean in order to help an unfamiliar audience understand. So I think in particular, the listing of facts and the use of definition to add clarity makes it clear that its purpose is to inform. All right, so let's go ahead and look at passage 2. Vast and primeval, unfathomable, unconquerable bastion of cottonmouth, rattlesnake, and leech. So right here, there's already a distinct difference in tone. This is like a very epic kind of tone. It's adding a sense of like grandeur to this. Vast, primeval, unfathomable, unconquerable. Those are very strong words, very strong diction that is forming a tone, because every piece has diction, right? This first piece has just kind of academic, formal diction, but it's not really very spicy. It's not very interesting. It's not amped up or emotional. So this has, I would say, more emotional diction. So this this maybe has plainer diction or academic diction, unemotional diction. Because if we're going to discuss diction for one, we might want to discuss diction for the other. This second one has emotional. And in this particular case, strongly positive, right? Very positive connotations. Grand, that could be a word you could use to describe the diction. So it would be up to you what word you want to choose to describe the diction, but there's several different ones you could use. Epic diction, creating a tone of, let's say, admiration and respect. All right. Bastion, right? A bastion is a stronghold. So again, very epic, very strong language of cottonmouth, rattlesnake, and leech. So this author also is using listing. So if we were going to go for a comparison contrast, you could discuss the differences in how the listing comes across between the two. Still not sure that's how I would want to organize it, but it's just a thought. Of vegetation, father of mosquito, soul of silt. The Okefenokee is the swamp archetypal. So right here we have some grand titles, and there's actually a term for this kind of title. So these are epithets here, where they are basically stand-in phrases that could replace the name itself. So we have use of epithet. The Okefenokee is the swamp archetypal, the swamp of legend, of racial memory. So again, we have that very strong diction continuing, of racial memory, of Hollywood. It gives birth to two rivers, right? Giving birth. So that right there is very metaphorical, which continues that kind of epic tone. The St. Mary's and the Swanee. So this is a shared detail. This passage over here also discussed the Swanee and, here we go, the Swanee and St. Mary's rivers. But you can really see the difference in tone between the two. So I think it's interesting that they're choosing two passages that are covering such similar information. That's probably deliberate on the part of College Board. So they do kind of probably want you to address the way that they are approaching the same information in different ways and how that differentiates the purpose of these two. So I am currently leaning towards a compare-contrast. Comparing and contrasting the tone, comparing and contrasting the use of the details and how they're presented and how that differentiates purpose between the two. Fanning out over 430,000 leaf-choked acres, choked again. very metaphorical. Every last one as sodden as a sponge. Well, this is technically simile, not metaphor, but if you wanted to clump them together for ease of discussion, you could say that they are all figurative, right? Non-literal. And then you could go into the specifics of the different types of figurative language being used, but this would make a better claim that you could draw in multiple pieces of evidence. This would be, I think, the broad category that I would discuss, since there are both similes and metaphors present, rather than, oh, let me write a paragraph about similes. Oh, let me write a paragraph about metaphors. No, that's inane. At the very least, if you're going to write a paragraph based around devices, which I still don't encourage you to do so, at the very least have a good larger category that the different devices can fall under. 430,000 acres of stinging, biting, and boring insects. Stinging, biting, boring insects. So now we have use of adjective. Is what's standing out to me. And again, the use of adjective is supporting that kind of epic tone that we've already seen developed. Maiden cane, gum, cypress, palmetto, slash pine, peat, muck, mud, slime, and ooze. So again, they're using the same strategy as the other one, right? That strategy of listing, but it's coming across very differently here. Things fester here. Things cook down, fester. Ooh, strong negative connotation, but in an interesting kind of way, right? This is a very mysterious, dark, interesting place right now. Cook down, decompose, deliquesce. I've actually never seen that word before in my life, but considering it's talking about festering, cooking down, decomposing, I'm guessing, making an educated guess based on context, that it has something to do with things being broken down in some way. Deliquesce. Oh, that's an interesting word. I'll have to look that up later. The swamp is, I've literally never seen it before in my life. The swamp is home to 225 species of birds, 43 of mammals. Ooh, so again, this listing and the specific numbers, that's something that I noticed over here too, right? The 175 species of birds, 40 species of mammals. So right here, 43 of mammals, 225 of birds. Looks like there's some disagreement on the facts. These are probably written at different times though. So I'm not going to like obsess over the fact or like say, oh, these passages are wrong. You generally speaking, you don't want to say the passages are wrong because they probably weren't at the time, right? These are obviously published works that were credible enough that College Board chose them for analysis. But it is interesting that there's that disagreement. I'm probably not going to write about it, but it's interesting nonetheless. 32 of amphibians, so they're kind of branching out into more types of animals than the other one, but again, that listing, that commonality, all variously equipped with beaks, talons, claws, teeth, and stingers, and fangs, not to mention the seething galaxies of gnats and deerflies and no-see-ums, the ticks, mites, hookworms, paramechia, that exist only to compound the misery of life. Ooh, very dark, very descriptive. I love it. It's so descriptive. So much imagery. So like the initial one had a little bit of imagery, but not really. This one has a lot of descriptive imagery, which kind of goes back as well to that use of figurative language, where it's just really amping up its game, making this really interesting, trying to draw you in. There are alligators here, bears, puma, bobcats, bowfin, cooters, snappers, possum, coon, gar. They feed on one another in the sludge and muck. So again, great descriptive imagery. And on floating mats of peat, they bury eggs, they scratch and stink and sniff at themselves, caterwauling and screeching through every minute of every day and night, till the place reverberates like some hellish zoo. And again, we have that figurative language, simile in that particular case, but going back to that figurative language. Wow, so there's a lot in this second piece. All right, so So looking at it from like a comparison contrast perspective, I'm going to go ahead and erase this to kind of give myself some room, or you know what, I'll go over here. So let's say compare and contrast. We have passage 1, we have both, and then we have passage 2. So they are both informative as far as purpose, but with a different slant. This one is more educational, seems more didactic. Though technically it has, I mean, passage 2 has just as many facts, so they're both equally educational. Just there's this tendency of associating education with boredom, and I think passage 1 kind of accomplishes that. It's a far more boring passage. Passage 2 is educational as well, but intriguing. So I think that passage 2, in addition to wanting to inform, also wants to draw you in. So this is a little more, just, passage 1 is more straightforward. Whereas passage 2 is more intriguing, and it creates that sense of intrigue through its use of figurative language, which the first passage definitely doesn't have, or if it does have it, it wasn't noticeable. Figurative language, descriptive imagery. Now, what they do both have in common is that listing of facts, and they do have in common, right, all of the animals and all that, which falls under listing of facts, really. So I'm not going to make it its own point. So they have in common that listing of facts. The difference, the really key difference, is that tone. So I'm going to describe it as maybe an epic tone. Is how I'm going to go with. There's, of course, probably better adjectives you could come up with, but they're not jumping to mind, and I'm not going to dwell on the matter. And you don't have time to dwell, so as long as you come up with an adjective that works, just go with it. It doesn't have to be the best adjective in the world. It has to make sense, match the passage, move on. This is a timed essay. And then passage 1 is just kind of, I would stick with that a straightforward tone would be how I would describe it. They both have diction. This is kind of just more informative diction. Whereas the diction, I would say, in passage 2 is more exciting diction, or epic diction, right? Strongly connotative diction, actually, I think might be the better one, because there's both strongly positive and strongly negative diction. So I'm going to describe this as using strongly connotative diction to create an epic tone or mood of excitement. Well, yeah, not really so much epic tone, actually, because tone is the way that the author feels about it. So let's call this to create a tone of approval, maybe. Yeah, because it is trying to draw in. I don't know. I'm kind of wibble wobbling here on tone, but in any case, it's a tone of approval, mood of excitement. It wants to draw in the audience right? Because mood is how the audience feels, tone is how the author feels. So the author clearly approves, even when it's using negative connotations, it's in an interesting way. So maybe a tone of approval and interest to draw in the audience. And that would be where I would focus my writing. As far as how I would organize it, I could do a passage 1 paragraph and a passage 2 paragraph. But in those paragraphs, I would want to address the similarities and the differences as well. So I'm going to talk about the purpose to inform. I'm going to mention that the purpose is similar to the other passage, maybe. And then I'm going to dwell on the differences. What stands out about it is this. Something along those lines. So I would probably stick with a paragraph that is primarily focused on each passage, or I would organize it by strategy, which I don't usually recommend, but since it's a comparison contrast, and since there are so many strategies in common, you could also do it that way, where you could say, Paragraph 1, okay, let's discuss the use of listing and how it is informative. Okay, Paragraph 2, use of imagery, how it's similar, how it's different, and how that leads to the purpose of both. It's really up to you which you would prefer, but I think that Paragraph 1 for passage 1, paragraph 2 for passage 2 would be a little more straightforward for a lot of you. Just make sure you're really connecting those devices, the differences in the devices to how it differentiates the purpose. So say, yes, they're both informative, but the differences in diction make it clear that passage 2 really wants to draw people in, whereas passage 1 is just informing the people who are already there. Passage 1 doesn't necessarily care if you go to visit this place. Passage 2, maybe they want you to visit, right? They want you to be really intrigued, to really care about this place, to have emotional investment in it, I would say is the big difference between these two passages and how their various devices help accomplish that. Let's go ahead and look at some sample essays and kind of see how the student authors approached it. Let's take a look. So our first sample essay is H1 here. Though both authors write about the Okefenokee swamp, so right there it starts by establishing similarity, which is one of the approaches I discussed by comparing and contrasting the two passages. In southern Georgia, their differing methods of presenting the landscape result in wildly different characterization. Nice, so they have a clear claim that there are different methods of presenting and that there's a difference in characterization based on it. I love it so far. This is a great essay. The two authors employ good diction there. I like that word. Use would have worked as well, though. They wouldn't have docked any points for it. Two authors employ descriptive detail and vibrant imagery. So this is a similarity, right? Both authors are doing this. So let's put similarities in yellow to convey their impressions of the Okefenokee. But sentence structure is the most illuminating rhetorical device. Interesting, and I like that diction there of illuminating. So it's talking that both of them are using sentence structure and that is what's making clear the differences in intent, I guess. It indicates the practical educational intent of the first writer. So this is a difference, right? The practical, let's just erase that real quick. Practical educational intent of the first writer and the engaging, entertaining intent of the second writer. The first passage reads as an encyclopedia. So it looks like they are organizing it with paragraphs by passage the way I recommended, but they're continuing to do that kind of compare-contrast throughout is what it appears as so far. Reads as an encyclopedia, detailed and precise, but with no emotionally charged words. So there they're getting into the lack of connotation that we kind of discussed in our analysis. The author details the geography. It is a shallow, saucer-shaped depression, approximately 25 miles wide, and distinctive features: low sandy ridges, grassy savannas. While not emotional, so again, this is a difference, and this is where they're elaborating a bit. While not emotional, the passage is full of details: exotic flowers, floating hearts, orchids. The strong point in the passage, however, is his description of the geography that enclosed the swamp. Low Atlantic, drain it, presents the swamp as a landform which has certain characteristics, but also as a part of larger geography. The author feels the Okefenokee swamp is just a place, another location to be described in an encyclopedia. So this is where they are coming to their conclusions. Based on the evidence, right, because this is a big listing of evidence. They kind of hint at some elaboration throughout, but they don't really delve into their analysis until the end of the paragraph. And this is basically a page-long paragraph here. The second passage is opposition to, is in opposition to. I think they're like missing a word there because some of it's crossed out, and the second passage opposes the first passage in almost every way. So here again, differences. The author conveys her attitude about Okefenokee in an entertaining, emotional prose. Her engaging details make her description of the swamp fly off the page. And that's kind of a use of a colloquialism there, kind of giving the student writers some like life and interest in their own writing. Let's make that red, actually. The swamp is not noisy, it is caterwauling and screeching and reverberating. Good use of details right there. So they're pulling out the examples of the diction and contrasting them to how it could have been described instead, right? I think the first passage would have used noisy. So she says, rather than it being noisy, it is using these words, using this diction, like some hellish zoo. So nice incorporation of detail. I like that they're incorporating it right into their sentence structure and not like quoting huge sections. They're only quoting individual words, which is an ideal way of kind of using evidence. My program is freaking out on me a little. But anyways, so I like the specific word choice rather than quotation of large sections. Dead matter does not just rot, things fester. So again, the student author is presenting the more academic, less connotative word before presenting the connotative words that the author used instead, to emphasize the differences in the more academic and unbiased language of the first passage and the more connotative and emotional language of the second passage. The writing brings images of rotting matter disintegrating into a pool of goo to mind. The author does not see the Okefenokee swamp as part of another ecosystem. It is its own ecosystem. And here is the difference that they're establishing. The Swanee and St. Mary's River do not link the swamp to the Atlantic. Instead, they are born. Ooh, interesting use of that detail there. I like that a lot. The swamp seems solely dependent on the it makes it seem solely dependent on the swamp for their existence. In fact, the river would not exist if they were not going to some place to the Atlantic. She describes the grunginess and smelliness of the swamp through vivid details. Vivid details, I like that. So that's another difference with the other passage. Instead of calmly, right? The other one does it calmly. So this is kind of what the other passage did. So that comparison contrast is being implied throughout, though she's not explicitly saying, unlike passage 1, she's not explicitly saying that, but she's implying it throughout, which is great. I love it. The swamp harbored all types of insects, she writes. 430,000 acres of stinging, biting, boring insects. The seething... I can't even read that. Oh, galaxies of gnats and deer flies and no-see-ums, ticks, mites. So this is a longer quote. The image makes your skin crawl. This is the elaboration on what the quote does. That's great. By describing life within the swamp, she brings the swamp to life as well. This is what she does with it, what the difference is in the prose. This is all beautiful stuff so far. Sentence structure is the final indicator of the writer's purpose. The first passage has short, clipped, exact sentences. Good observation. Similarly, the author's intention is to characterize Okefenokee Swamp by placing it exactly with respect to other land features. So write precise sentences, precise intention. I like that. That's great. While the first author gives the impression the swamp is this distant, calm, but watery land feature, the second author implies none of that. The second author employs long, winding sentences crammed with details of smells and sights. In the second author's hands, the swamp becomes alive, a squirming, dripping, oozing, stinging mass filled with a spectrum of wildlife. I really like what the student author did here, where the student author imitated the style of the second passage when describing the second passage. That's great. I love it. They're not the precise words the second passage used, but it's the very similar style. The author educates us about the Okefenokee. While the first author educates us, the second entertains us with its grossness and its unusualness. So they have a clear claim about the differences, and they talk about how the style indicates purpose, which was the prompt, and how the differences in style indicate the different purposes, which was kind of the implied prompts. So this is an excellent essay. I would say that this is a 9 out of 9. It is insightful. It is descriptive. It is grammatical. The lowest score I would give this is an 8 out of 9. Anywhere from an 8 to a 9 out of 9. But honestly, I would give it the 9 because it's an excellent piece of writing. I only noticed the one grammatical error, which doesn't eliminate it from consideration of a 9. It's very strong analysis. It's good stuff. I like it a lot. It's not dominated by their evidence. Like, they have individual words they're drawing in, but the majority of their focus is on their elaboration and the points that they're making with the evidence. This is just really good stuff overall. Let's go ahead and look at the next essay. This one's probably going to be a bit weaker if I had to guess. There's only 2 essays, so I'm guessing this one's probably the mid. It could be a low. I haven't read it yet. We'll take a look at it. The 2 passages given describe the Okefenokee Swamp in very different lights. All right, so it is establishing, they're both describing the Okefenokee. It is establishing that they do so in different ways. Although they are in some ways similar, the styles of the authors of these paragraphs are very different. The passages differ in diction, syntax, imagery, and tone, so they're establishing differences. Good. First of all, passage 1 is written in very plain manner. Good. Only the words necessary to describe subjects are used. The diction is very plain. Passage 2 chooses a diction that is very ornate and frivolous. So this passage decided to do the paragraphs by strategy with both passages in each, it looks like, which is the other method of organization that I had suggested as a possibility. It seems as though the author is spitting out every word that he or she thinks to describe a subject. And that word frivolous there does have a somewhat negative connotation, so we kind of see some disapproval on the part of the student author towards the second passage there. Maybe they intended it, maybe they didn't. An example of the contrast of the dictions is shown in the description of the rivers that branch out. So I like the fact that they picked a detail that both passages addressed, which was something that I had noted. Passage 1 clearly states the swamp is drained by 2 rivers, gives their names. However, passage 2 talks about the birth of 2 rivers and how they fan out over leaf-choked acres. Passage 2 is more detailed. Here's where the weakness of this comes in. They're doing an excellent job of establishing contrast and talking about strategy. They're doing a great job of that. However, they haven't answered the question because it asks you to connect strategy to purpose. And I see nothing about how these differences in this particular strategy differentiate the purpose of passage 1 and passage 2. They haven't talked about the purposes yet. So I'm getting a bad feeling that this essay is not going to be as high scoring as it should be, right? The student author very clearly understands how these passages are being developed, but they've not actually answered the question yet, and that makes me nervous. Secondly, there are very different styles of syntax that are chosen. The main distinction, sentence structure. So this student also focuses on sentence structure. Passage 2 uses many more compound complex sentences than passage 1. So that's the similar observation that the last student author made, where it has a simpler sentence structure, a more straightforward sentence structure in the first passage, a more complex and winding sentence structure in the second. Great observation again. Numerous adjectives used to describe, add most of the sentence length, parallel structure seen in the first passage. However, there is so much more in passage 2. So again, they're doing a great job of comparing and contrasting, but I'm worried that they still haven't gotten to the point of this essay yet. Word choice and position all lead to the imagery of the passages. Passage 1, because of its lack of adjectives, does not leave one with very much imagery, so there's some but not a lot. However, the adjectives that it does use give the readers a very good idea of what the place looks like. Low sandy ridges, wet grassy savannas, a very precise idea. I like how they're describing this. Passage 2 uses words that are much more aloof and let the reader make it so. I'm not sure I would describe the language as aloof in passage 2. It's very engaged. It's not really distant. I would disagree with that assertion. However, you don't mark down an essay just because you disagree with the point it's making. So just FYI, as a reader, you can disagree with an essay without marking it down as long as they elaborate on the point that they are making. Things fester, give a reader a mysterious view of an almost mythological place. Okay, so the fact that it's almost mythological maybe is what's creating that distance. I see where they're going with that. The view of the scene is more abstract, yet oddly more envisional. Well, that's not envisioned. Yeah, because of the numerous descriptive words. But again, they have not answered the question. This makes me so sad because they're doing a great job at comparing and contrasting. This is an excellent comparison-contrast essay, but it doesn't address the purpose of either passage and the distinctions between those purposes based on the strategies they're using. It's so unfortunate. They're focusing on the strategies, not on the question, and this makes me so sad because just an extra 2 sentences in each of these paragraphs, 1 for each passage, would have just done the trick, and this would be a brilliant essay, but I have a suspicion that it's going to be a 4, unless they get to the point magically. If they get to the point, it could be a 5 or a 6, but they've not yet, so I'm really worried for this essay. Lastly, the tones of these 2 passages are entirely different. Factually, didactically, excerpt from a travel guide or a school book, makes the reader feel informed and educated, yet it stirs no emotion, and then it gives some specific details, which I like, adds to the precision and actuality of the passage. Passage 2 is entirely distinct. I like that they're using that word. Provokes emotions. Good. Reader feels though he or she will be going on a journey, mysterious place. This is all great stuff. It's still not answering the question, though, so I'm so nervous for them. Very little is known about the passage. Seems as though it should come out of an adventure novel. Indiana Jones script. It's filled with excitement and the unknown. Okay. The final paragraph. They finally seem to get to the point, maybe. Passage 1 is direct and to the point. It seems like it is meant for learning. Passage 2 is imaginative and creative, uses many descriptive words to portray a vivid yet abstract scene. They say it's imaginative and creative, but it doesn't actually give a purpose for passage 2. What is the purpose? Well, the purpose of being imaginative and creative maybe is to inspire excitement, make people want to go there, make people care about the place. They don't actually give a purpose for passage 2, womp womp. But they do give a purpose for passage 1. They're so close and yet so far because they focused on the devices throughout. And they just didn't answer the question entirely. They flirted with it. They really flirted with it at the end here, but they didn't completely answer the question. So, I'm unfortunately going to have to give this a 4 out of 9. It makes me very sad to do so. If they covered the purpose of both passages, even just slapped on the end here, it would have been the 5 out of 9. If they did so throughout and in a little more detail with specifically how each device contributed to the difference, it would be like a 6, a 7, or an 8 out of 9. This essay had so much promise. The student author, very clearly understood the passages very well, understood the strategies of the passages. They had great detail. They had great elaboration. They just didn't answer the question completely or consistently, which is very sad and unfortunate.